All right. Hello. Welcome everyone to our October installment of Convene Chats. This is our newer webinar series where we host individuals and folks from organizations that are involved with our in-person Convene events. So if you're not familiar with us and our organization, we're the National Cybersecurity Alliance. We, of course, promote online safety and keeping everyone safe online. It is Cybersecurity Awareness Month, October. We're halfway through it already. And I am being joined today by a special guest, Dr. Bob Hausman of Proofpoint. So thanks for joining me today, Dr. Bob. Uh, Dr. Bob and I go way back. He's been a presenter at two of our in-person events. You can find out more about our events at our website at StaySafeOnline.org. But today we're going to go through Dr. Bob's presentation that he gave at the Seattle Convene event back in August. So Bob, thank you for joining us. Appreciate you being here once again. So you presented at Convene Seattle about culture and about transforming the security culture of an organization. So you want to take a second and kind of maybe just talk about who you are, what you do at Proofpoint, and then we can go right into security culture.
Sure. So first of all, thank you for having me on. It's a real pleasure to be here. So I've been with Proofpoint for about 2.5 years now. And as you can see on the slide, my title is the Manager of Learning, Architecture, and Assessments, which means that I manage the team who is responsible for crafting the email simulations that you get if you use our phishing platform, and also the teachable moments that pop up if somebody clicks on something or downloads an attachment. And I'm also just generally like really excited about getting the word out to other people, just to figure out like how do you educate people on these pretty complicated topics that are high stakes. So this is a really great opportunity, I think, to be able to talk about some of that.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. Yeah, exactly. So we as the NCA, myself and you at Proofpoint, we're all in this role of educating people about how to keep themselves safe on the internet. Of course, we all read about all the threats that we face, all the big hacks in the news and things like that. And so much of that does unfortunately come down to us as individuals to have the knowledge and awareness of what the threats are and how to protect ourselves. And so when you're talking about educating a group at an organization, the concept of a security culture has come into the conversation over the last couple of years. And that was the main point of your whole, presentation here. So I would love to hear sort of some of the ideas you have on that and what security culture can do to help increase the security posture of an organization. So I'll hand it right back to you to kind of kick us off with that.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, so in this conversation that you're seeing kind of building on the left-hand side of the screen was actually sent to one of my friends, and she got a text message out of the blue from her CFO, and he's basically asking her, hey, can you drop what you're doing and go buy me some gift cards? And so this catches her off guard. She's like, wait a second, what is this? And so he has to explain, and reiterating like the urgency of this. And so fortunately, she had the presence of mind to ask both clarification questions and to just kind of understand what was going on. And eventually, she decided, you know what, I'm going to go talk to him in his office. So she went over, and he's sitting there and he looks at her. He's like, what do you want? She's like, you've been texting me. And he's like, no, I haven't. That's when they both put it together that somebody had basically got her number and was masquerading as the CFO. So I just thought that this was, I mean, it hits home close to home, but also just thinking about this in terms of your cybersecurity culture. And how is it at your organization? Are employees allowed to ask clarification questions? Are they allowed to express doubt? Sort of what are those expectations that are built around communication? And so I think these are really diagnostic questions when you're thinking about your own organization and trying to evaluate like what is it that is appropriate and what is not. And so I think, Cliff, one of the things that is tough about this topic is hard to define, like what is culture? Like I think
Sure.
it's yeah, it's like a squishy topic, right?
Yeah,
And
absolutely. We do a lot of trainings and we talk about security. Yeah, but what does it mean to have a culture around, security, and what aspects of that are important?
and I think my favorite definition that I've heard, and it's kind of informal, is just it's the way we do things around here. And so what that means is there's sort of an unspoken set of assumptions that guide people's behavior. And so it's complicated because they are assumptions, often unstated and tacit. So you have to kind of learn them through observing other people's behavior and seeing like what is rewarded, what's punished, and so forth. So I do recognize that culture is a tricky topic to talk about, to define. It's also really, I want to recognize and acknowledge upfront that it's hard to talk about culture change. Like I'm going to talk about these three principles, but I want to recognize upfront that your organization is unique, your culture is unique, and it's very difficult to change. And so these are just a couple of principles that I put together that may kind of help formulate thoughts about how you might go about that change.
Hey, yeah. So we can see here you've come up with these three principles that we can expand on in the next couple of minutes. Is so creating a culture of communication and feedback, an engaged culture, and a culture of trust and respect.
Mhm.
So beginning with the first one, a culture of communication and feedback. So what does that bring into the picture?
Yeah, so I think what's interesting about this is that when every year, Proofpoint publishes the State of the Fish report. And one of the surprising findings that came out of this was on the left-hand column, you can see these are the actions that security professionals believe would help advance security at their organization. But what's interesting is if you look at the mismatch between what the user, what our employees want is different. So you can see it there at the bottom. Employees are asking for increased engagement with leadership and the security teams. I think that's really interesting because they want to talk. They want to know like what's going on. And so I guess the question kind of naturally arises like, well, what should we talk about? Like what are those ways of engaging with the security teams? And so on the next slide, what I was thinking about is as an answer to that question, I was thinking about the importance of storytelling and how down through human history, stories have always been a way of taking wisdom, entertainment, knowledge, and passing it down to different uh, generations. And so if you look at what the benefits of storytelling are, there's two of them, like two big broad buckets. The first being motivational, that you can help generate interest in a topic by telling really cool stories. I think that's pretty obvious. But in addition, there's this component of familiarity, I think, that also is developed when you hear a story, you understand that there are characters, there's a setting, a plot that contains conflict, rising action, resolution. All of those elements of the story are very familiar. And so it can help you in remembering kind of like what the message is. The second benefit is more cognitive in nature. And I think of this as stories can help set us straight. Like if we have a misconception about the way that something works, a really compelling story might help remediate that misconception. And then this, as I said before, the structures are really well known, and that can help you in the recall of information that you heard in a story before. So if you go to the next slide, I wanted to talk about two uh, representations that the mind uses in order to organize that information. The first one is a script, and it's exactly what it sounds like. It helps you sequence a pattern of events. And for example, you have a fast food script. So when you go in, talk to the cashier who also takes your order. The menu is like plastered up on the wall. You you pay for it, you move off to the side, you get your food, you seat yourself, and then you clean up your table and head out. So that script really well known, but it's completely different from your fancy restaurant script. And so the characters are maybe the same, but the sequence of events might be different. You might be talking to different characters in that. But I think, the point is that a script is able to help you in recognition and recall of some information. And then on the next slide, we have a second mental representation that's referred to as a schema. And so a schema is, you could think of it kind of like a series of slots and variables, or like key value pairs if you're into programming. And the purpose here, again, is that it can help, because of that structure, it can help you um, ask questions. It can help you diagnose or troubleshoot. So on the right, you see this richly articulated schema for what a cyber attack may involve. And so if you hear somebody tell you, oh, hey, there was somebody had malware installed on their machine, you can start asking questions like, well, what was the attack vector? What was the operational impact of that malware? How was it remediated? And so this, again, is helping you organize and recall all of that information. So I guess now that we understand kind of the structure of how the mind is representing this knowledge, in the next slide, we talk about answering that question of, well, what are the stories? What should we be talking about? And I want to think about this as kind of like a funnel, like starting at the most broad level. I think we should be telling interesting stories. And Cliff, I was curious, have you read this article by any chance?
I have actually read this article. It's a fascinating story. It's very personal too. Like the person is just talking about like, I can't believe I fell for this kind of scam. They even talk about how looking back, like as soon as it was over and had happened, they were like, oh my gosh, I've made this huge mistake. But it was a fascinating, it's a long read, but it's a fascinating
Mhm.
read. I do highly recommend this one in particular. It's a really, really good story. And I've had other stories that I've come across too, where people are the victims of identity theft and they go through how much time and effort it takes to recover from those things. And so these can be good motivators and contextualizing sort of the importance of staying secure and security and educating yourself about the types of threats that are out there, right? So absolutely 100%.
Yeah, I just really appreciate her candor. She talks very honestly, and you can see at the byline, she's a financial advice columnist.
Hmm.
Yeah, she's like, I would never fall for that. So that's the misconception. And I think what that article did for me is help remove, that idea that I would never fall for that because I think one of the things that she talks about is kind of that relentless, like just like the attacker just wearing her down to the point where she's just like, I just want to get out of this and
Yeah,
get rid of, like, just move on with my life. Something you
right.
don't really think about.
Right. They get you in the moment. They get you all worked up and emotional.
Hmm.
And they do make it hard to divert and go validate with somebody else because they are always thinking of how you're going to try to get out of it and they get ahead of that thought. Um, so yeah, it's scary, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And the next slide, I think if you talk about like the interesting, then funneling down into, let's talk about threats that actually face your industry specifically. This article that came out, when was this? This is a couple months ago. Back in, what does that say, February?
February.
Yeah, this one caught me by surprise because what the person had done was they remember their training and said, okay, well, I have this $25 million invoice that needs to be paid. So they got a bunch of the higher ups on a Zoom call to double check with them. They all gave it thumbs up, okay, approved, and then submitted it and found out later that all of the people on the Zoom call were all deep faked. And so even when you try to do the right thing, it might not work out for you. So I thought that this was a interesting because it helps remediate the misconception of I'm not that important or that the security protocols and controls that are in place will protect me. Turns out that is not the case all the time.
Right. So social engineering, or what we know as hacking the humans, like in all these cases, are very, very powerful attack methods that attackers are using these days. And there are no firewalls, or there are no software protection programs that can protect you from these types of things. So yeah, we definitely need to be aware of that, and know what to do in these scenarios.
Mhm. One of my favorite pieces of advice for if you're talking to somebody and you're not sure if they're a deep fake, ask them to raise their hands above their head
Yeah. Right.
because they can't do it. They're just a face, you know.
Yeah.
Uh, Sometimes the most complicated attack can be foiled with the simplest solution.
Yeah, but again, like we don't know. I bet a lot of people in this call didn't know to ask that
Right.
question, right? Is we don't
Exactly.
we don't know what we don't know.
Exactly.
And so I think too, like keeping up with latest threats and things like that are super important.
Mhm.
As you I think continue here with this one, like the relevant threats to your organization, right?
Yeah, so again, taking that funnel one level deeper, Proofpoint has a publication that is put out every week called a threat alert. And this is coming from our threat intelligence team. And so you can read these if they are relevant to your organization. There's like a little PDF that you can send out on email. There's a training module that goes with it and a phishing template. So all three of these things kind of work in conjunction to help you talk about like what's happening to us or in
Mhm.
our organization. I think that that's a good way to bring it home. I know it's like abstract to talk about, oh, this, financial advice columnist, but what about like this is happening to me specifically?
Right. Right. Yeah. So this is kind of all talked about, like um, you know, generating this culture of communication and feedback, and making sure that your communications to your employees are relevant to them. If you're in certain industries and certain threats are emerging for that particular industry, it's important to select the proper types of topics to talk about with your folks, because it really hits home better. And the stories, just again, they are more relevant to that people.
Yeah.
So the next principle that you talk about is an engaged
Mhm.
culture. So driving engagement,
Mhm.
getting people to be responsive. So talk a little bit about why that's important.
Yeah, so I wanted to start this piece of the talk by referring back to a physics professor that I worked with back in grad school. And he was amazing. He won all sorts of teaching awards. And one of the pieces of advice that he gave me that kind of stuck with me throughout since having left academia was that he said that you should always be able to answer this question where the students ask, why do I need to know this? And he was teaching physics. So, sometimes there's a mismatch between what you're
Yeah.
learning in class and your actual day to day. But I think for us, this is super important. Like, why do I need to learn about cybersecurity? And I think we should be able to answer this question honestly, truthfully, and talk about how it doesn't just benefit you at work, but it extends to when you go home, when you're talking to your kids, your older family members. Like all of these things are, you know, staying safe online broadly. Doesn't matter if you're at work. And so I was looking up, did a little bit of background research and found there's a LinkedIn course that you can take on cybersecurity, and it costs about $380 to take. And a Coursera has also a cybersecurity course that's about $400. So you could potentially think of this as kind of like a small benefit or continuing education or something like that that extends not just at work, but to home as well.
Right. So you mean when you're receiving security awareness training at work,
Hmm.
it's like getting a free $400 course
Yeah.
that you can use anywhere. And we talk about that a lot, especially during Cybersecurity Awareness Month here at NCA, right? Like we are all about educating people to keep themselves and their families safe. And my boss, Lisa, she gives a talk um, about a report that we do, where finding out where do people typically learn about cybersecurity and how do they get educated about it. And like the vast majority of people learn about that at work. So if
Hmm.
you don't work, or if you're retired, or whatever it is, you're a lot less likely to experience the free benefit of having this awareness training at work. So it's important to pay attention and understand that as you said, it extends to your home life, your family, and all that stuff as well. And there's certainly value to that. So yeah, we
Yeah.
should take advantage of it if it's being offered to us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, next time you get that training email, you're like, oh, okay, now I'm more willing to do it if I can see the applicability of
Yeah,
it.
yeah,
Yeah,
you might learn something.
absolutely. So speaking of training, on the next slide, this is a really interesting study that was conducted, I think maybe 10 years ago now, and it was done on the edX platform. So this is one of those massive open online courses where people can take a free class. And what they did was they looked at 6.9 million video watching sessions. And they very simply just asked, did the person watch that video all the way to completion? So that's what you see as the dependent measure on the graph on the right is what is the percentage of people who watched to the end? And you can see, interesting, any of the videos between 0 and 3 to 6 minutes, 100% engagement, like no problem. But as the videos start to get longer, you see that precipitous drop off in engagement to the point where at 20 or 12 to 40 minutes, it's like 20% are watching that. And so I think this has an implication for providers when we're thinking about, how do I best train somebody? They have to watch the video. And if they're just like hitting play and going and making coffee, then we're not getting to them. So I mean, that's a problem, right? And
Sure.
yeah, and I know that you guys, NCA puts out some of the videos. How long are your videos, just out of curiosity?
So they're short.
Yeah.
We've again, you said this is like 10-year-old research. We've
Mhm.
you know, gotten this information and taken that into account. And so we created a brand new video series last year called the Cubicle Series,
Mhm.
which you can find on our website or cubicleseries.com. Just a quick plug for that one. All the episodes are less than 5 minutes. So they're really easy to watch, super digestible, they're funny. And so we check off that first tick mark of we're not going to make you watch a 30-minute video because a lot of people just feel like they don't have time or motivation to go through that for cybersecurity training. So we have to get them engaged in a video that's long enough to explain the concept and what we're trying to get them to understand, but not so long that they're going to lose interest and not watch the whole video or not even begin to watch the video in the first place. So if you're, using video to style training as a platform, this is really important to keep in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny, the Cubicle series, I feel is good enough that you'd want to binge it. You might not want to stop
Yeah,
after that first one.
true. And we did try to make it binge worthy, that's for sure.
So the next slide basically tries to take this research and put it into application. So how would you structure your year-long security educational program? And one of the arguments that we try to make is that you should adopt a microlearning approach to education such that each month may have a video, an assessment, maybe something to read that's only 10 minutes long. And most people can integrate that into their workday. It's not this huge onerous thing that you dread when you see that it's assigned to you. But I think that that's one way is to, be able to meet people where they are. They are able to uh, fit this in to their busy work schedule. Um, and in addition to that, I feel like this is an ongoing conversation. So you can see like within the columns, there's training, but then there's also other ways of communicating the same information through phishing simulations, role-specific training. If you have people who are very attacked people or VAPs, you may want to say, it's not your fault, but we're going to make sure that you're like leveling up in your detection of these types of attacks because they're coming at you. And then also the communications that you send along, maybe drawing on threat alerts or like what you're seeing in the popular press. Again, idea is to keep the conversation going so that this isn't something that's kind of one and done, and that it becomes more of a conversation.
Absolutely. Yeah, you got to keep current and keep it relevant too, because that's what the attackers do. The attackers follow the news as well. So after the LastPass password breach, we saw a lot of phishing emails impersonating LastPass, encouraging people to, reset their passwords and things like that. So it's definitely very important for us to stay on top of those topics.
Mhm.
Um, okay, great. That's awesome. So again, we have another concept here that you talk about of trust and respect.
Mhm.
So how do we get that going for the third layer here?
Yeah, I think when talking about especially this idea of respect, I feel like this requires us as a community to adopt a new mindset. So sometimes when you listen to people talk about cybersecurity, they may be talking about like the weakest link or um, you can't patch stupid or you can't fix stupid. And I feel like all of those, that type of mentality is like a deficit mindset. Like you're thinking about people as a cost to your organization. And in fact, what I think what we should do instead is think about people more as an asset to us. So I think a really funny example of this is there's a Canadian TV show called Red Green. And at the end of every episode, it's kind of like pulls it all together and he talks about, what did we learn in this episode? And he ends with, remember, I'm pulling for you. We're all in this together. And I think that's exactly the mentality that we need to be going into cybersecurity is thinking about how does my behavior affect the collective? Like, what can I do in order to keep all of us safe? And this is basically the same message that you see with the Department of Homeland Security. You know, they only have a certain amount of personnel, but all of us can, if we see something, we should say something and the same thing can apply to cybersecurity as well, is that you have more eyes on email than you have people in your SOC or IT team. So that they should be looked at as an asset. And I feel like the National Cyber Security Alliance has also thought of it in this way as well. I feel like a lot of your messaging is very similar.
Yeah, we try to be empowering, right? And educating people that you can make a difference and that you are important. Your actions do matter. I know a lot of us maybe feel this concept of data breach fatigue or breach fatigue.
Mm-hmm.
You're just constantly hearing about data breaches in the news. And you know what, no matter how many of my passwords are unique and strong and long, and I don't know how many times I turn on MFA, like my data is going to get breached somehow anyways. So why
Yeah.
even try? But so it is important to remember that we do have some power over our own security, and you want to be resilient, right? Like nobody's cyber proof. But if you do these basic things, you can be better off when a breach does happen. And keeping abreast of what's going on is an important part of that as well. Um, so yeah, exactly. And you have to create this respect between the security community and the practitioners who understand the threats at a very deep and technical level, and making sure that we're doing a good job communicating that in language that the everyday user can understand. Like you don't have to understand how a firewall works to understand that you need to watch out for phishing because things can come in anyways, no matter how good your firewall might be, there's always a few that might slip through the cracks. So, um, yeah, we need to be absolutely, thinking of these things as well.
Yeah, and I think this also connects back to the communication principle where, if you're in more of a a dialogue with the leadership and with the security team, that you're now like you're humanizing the employees. You're seeing, oh, they're not just reporting spam, but they're actually they're trying, they're helping, and seeing it kind of in both ways. I think if as long as that communication channel is open, hopefully that people it benefits on both sides of the equation.
Right. Yeah, there should be no fear of reporting and asking
Exactly.
questions.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, and I think that also comes back to this idea of respect. So in the next slide, it's interesting that you mentioned, every once in a while you get that one email that's kind of slips through the detection stack and it makes its way into your inbox. And we know because we report it that not every email filter is 100% reliable. That's just not the case. It's interesting too that we also forgive that. We're like, okay, well, we know technology is not perfect. I think we should extend that to human beings as well. It's like, I am definitely not perfect, and that's okay. Just in the same way that we give that leeway to technology. So
Sure.
this, yeah, sorry, what were you going to say?
No, no, absolutely. You're right. I mean, we talk about this too, like with our game show, one of the questions is about, what should you do if you think you've accidentally clicked on
Mhm.
the link
Mhm.
in a phishing email. And so that goes beyond reporting a suspected phishing email. But if you have gone to that length of okay, I actually think I might have got here.
Mhm.
What do? You still need to report it, right? Like you need to be, and people need to feel like that's okay. Like they're not going to get fired for clicking on the link in a phishing email. So that's where we see policies where people are, you know, having disciplinary action against people who fail phishing tests as maybe not the best route forward, right? Like we want to be empowering people and continuing to engage with them and educating them and just reminding everyone that there are, and this is in one of the cubicle episodes actually, there's a point in which every single person is vulnerable to a phishing attack. You might be overwhelmed, you might be depressed, you might be going through a divorce, you might be, there's layoffs happening at the company, or you get a really, really well crafted, really relevant phishing email. So, like, for example, I just moved recently and I got a test phishing email that was confirming my address change. And it
No
was
way.
so relevant to what was going on in my life,
Yeah.
but I did catch it, but at the same time, like if I had been behind or had been expecting something similar, it would have been really
Mhm.
easy for me to have fallen for that, right? So making sure that we're educating our people, but also letting them know that it's okay if this happens, but we need to work together to mitigate any damage that could result from going through with clicking a link or opening an attachment or whatever it is that you've done. And so that's where culture can be really, really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of my coworkers, Alex, makes that same point is, would you rather know about it or not know about it? Like the
Right.
infection happened, like, an incident happened. If you can build a culture where it's okay to admit wrongdoing, you're much better off. And that kind of goes along with this slide. This comes out of some research that was done by Nick Chatter and George Lowenstein, who is a behavioral economist. They published this in 2022. And I thought it was really fascinating in the context of cybersecurity because what they do is they make a distinction when trying to attribute, what was the root cause of something? Do you attribute to the individual or the system? And in this scenario, we have, that one email makes it through the gateway. The person has antivirus software installed on their machine. They click on the email and they get launched into a web isolation where that page that loads says, hey, your browser is out of date. And they remember from their training, oh, I should keep my software up to date. So they go ahead and update now. Boom, and you get malware installed on your machine. So the iframe or the individual frame attribution says, oh, it was that person's fault. They clicked on it. They let this happen. But I think probably a better way to think about this is to pull back and look at the whole system and see how each piece of it contributed to the overall incident. And I think that can help you, by expanding your perspective, think more deeply about, well, where can we remediate this in the future and make sure that this doesn't happen? Because, an individual has to click on links and as part of their job.
Mhm.
Some people can't avoid it, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, I see this argument play out on LinkedIn all the time. Is the human the weakest link kind of thing? Like, shouldn't the technology be protecting people from making these mistakes? But at the end of the day, it's a team effort. It's a layered security approach, right? So you've got the secure email gateway, that's one layer, antivirus software, another layer, and then the web isolation, another layer, right? So you've got these layers that happen, and you can't blame an individual user completely, right? Like maybe they should have noticed something about the email was off, but did it get there in their inbox in the first place? Yes. Did the antivirus software not catch it? Yes. And so you've got multiple points of failure, not just a single point of failure of the human. So it is important to recognize that too.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I feel like this makes us smarter. Like when we're looking at this, we're thinking about it in a more intelligent way. And instead of just like blaming the person,
Yeah.
that person, yeah, they're
Also, it also gives you a little bit of empathy for people,
yeah,
right? Like we're
that's a brilliant
all
point.
busy, and the
Mhm.
security team is trying, the individuals are trying, they're being trained, and as you mentioned, they know they're supposed to keep their software updated, and so the attacker tricks them into installing a malicious update. So yeah, I mean, we're all constantly targeted, and the attackers are studying what we're doing to try to prevent them from being successful.
Mhm.
And so it is hard. It's honestly it's hard to stay secure. That's why we talk about it so much.
Right. Yeah, and I really appreciate what you said about empathy. I think that that's important. So that the very first thing that you should, as you know, when you find out, oh, there was an incident, yeah, the empathy should be the first response. Oh,
Hmm.
okay, this happened. Now let's figure out what we can do to. And I think this also goes back to that article that we talked about earlier with the financial columnist, that there's a lot of shame involved in this. There's a lot of emotions. Like you feel stupid when something like this happens.
Hmm.
So none of that, all of those emotions are real, and we just need to be like aware that that's happening. Um,
Yeah, and there can be a lot of victim blaming too in these things. They're thinking like, how dumb do you have to be to fall for something like that, right? But that's not always true. I mean, this is, as you mentioned, that person, they're a well-educated individual. They know a lot about, money and scams most likely, and they just were caught off and, tricked. And
mhm,
that's what the bad guys are trained to do and hone their practice every single day is to trick us and
mhm.
to get us going. And so I want to move along
Yeah,
here. Your
absolutely.
next slide does talk about kind of something that's important too, is about practicing and knowing what to do when you think something's going on.
Yeah, and I'm like thinking about this from a cognitive point of view. It's important to give people authentic practice. So this is, the 10,000 hour rule uh, that was made famous by Malcolm Gladwell. You can't learn something if you don't get a chance to practice with feedback. And so that's what this represents is a Google employee blogged, I think it was back in May, he had published this argument, felt like a screed against phishing. Like you're eroding your trust with your employees by trying to trick them. And so he made the argument we should treat this like a fire drill instead. And so one of the ways that this can be implemented is by sending an email message to the recipient, your employees, and say, look, all I want you to do is push the report suspicious button. That's it. End of
Hmm.
story. And so now as an employee, I'm thinking, oh, well, where is that button? Is it buried like 3 layers deep in my Microsoft Outlook email client? Or is it in the banner? Like, where is it? So I have to go
Hmm.
find it. I have to push it. And then I also learn like what happens next. Is that email put in the trash? Is it deleted? Is it stay in my inbox? Like, what's the sequence of events afterwards? So I feel like this is a really important argument that they made. I
Hmm.
feel like there's room for both. I feel like you should do both simulations and you should do fire drills. Um,
Yep.
but again, it's that issue of trust.
Yeah, and two, when you're coming up with a campaign or you're going to do this at your organization, it's really important to educate people what to expect, what we're expecting to happen as a result of these things, and that it may not be punitive, right? Like we want
Mhm.
this to be educational. And maybe there will be incentives or something like that to do well, but that it's never going to be held against you
Yeah.
for people who repeatedly click on the phishing tests in the wrong way. Maybe that just means that you need to get more personal with that individual and explain to them what's expected and what's going on and how to recognize it better. And in some cases, maybe there's an extra layer of other security stack you could layer onto that particular individual. But again, like educating people about what we're looking for here and why we're doing this and why it's important, just again goes back to building that culture of trust and
Mhm.
respect and
Mhm.
communication to make sure people
Mhm.
understand why this is happening. It's not to try to trick you, It's to give you the opportunity to learn and to practice.
Mhm. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It's all in the framing of it, both in like what are we doing and why.
Mhm,
And you can get creative with it. Like I've heard some companies will run what they call like a fish derby. So like the month of February, for example, they're just going to blast fishing simulations at you, and your job is to catch them all. And if
mhm,
you do, then you win a prize. So I think the next slide talks about like, let's I mean, obviously, click rates are important, especially, when we're talking about real messages. But I think we should also start talking about celebrating success. Like, let's talk about those people who are at the top of their game in terms of reporting. Like, maybe they should be given some company recognition. You could give them a small prize. Like, anything that you think would help them, because I'm again thinking about this from a behavioral psychology point of view. What we want to do is reward good behavior, and that's
right.
that's exactly what this is supposed to do. Is that in a simulation we have that opportunity to reward good behavior, and I really want to stress that.
Mhm.
You don't want to
Yeah,
just
and
punish
it,
people all
it
the
people
time.
get in the habit of reporting, right? And then they report suspected fish that could be real fish too, right? And that's the whole goal, right? Is to get people to report when they see something that is unusual. Goes back to that the DHS, right? Like see something, say something,
Yeah,
um, mentality, right? So um, absolutely, I agree, and this is a good way to continue to engage with your people and generate that culture of security. Once again, is saying, "Hey, like we got this thing going on, like we got a prize, we got points, or there's all organizations have all sorts of methods of incentives, and I think that could be actually pretty fun, also.
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Well, any other closing thoughts, Bob? This has been awesome. Appreciate you being here once again. Dr. Bob is absolutely a total pro here, and we really appreciate him speaking at our conferences, and we really appreciate partnering with Proofpoint. We've been board member a long time and all those things, and so it's been a great relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you again for having me on. This has been a delight. It's really nice to talk to you. And um, if you are interested in changing your culture, there are a couple of recommended readings. We'll send these out with links so that you can see them. But I highly recommend Dr. Carrie Perlson wrote this paper with the best title ever about building a propaganda machine. I think is awesome. And she gets down into like really concrete things that you can do to change culture. It's not like this abstract pie in the sky stuff. She just does a phenomenal job. So we'll send you all some links to those papers.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Bob. And yes, so this has been recorded. We will send a copy of the slides out with the recording so you can rewatch or you can go back through the slides too if you want to look any closer. And we'll also provide some helpful links as Dr. Bob mentioned as well. I'm going to check the chat really quick and see if there's any questions we can answer quickly here. So I do see one in the Q&A. So it says how to balance the importance of a long year program with less time availability of business executives and other learning requirements. So which strategy could be successful? So balancing needing to do a long-term program with just, I guess, the available time, and maybe getting buy-in of executives.
Yeah, I feel like this is a tough problem to solve because they're so time constrained. But I think you could probably do it in kind of like the Trojan mouse type of way, kind of slipping in messages here and there where they have to read, a summary report on something. But just getting creative in the ways that you can communicate with them, and I feel like probably with most board conversations, there's going to be, some talk about cybersecurity. And so again, maybe you can just slide, some advice into those wherever you can. I don't have a
Absolutely.
great
And
answer, but that's
this
a
is a fun
literal
question.
comment.
I
Yeah.
think we can both answer this one. So what's your favorite thing about Cybersecurity Awareness Month?
Um, the stories, all of the stuff that I'm learning about, I think it's fantastic to hear, the success stories about, when um, actually like a group of cyber attackers gets taken down, like,
Mm.
feeling that hope, like, oh yeah, it's not just all bad news.
Yeah,
Um,
I just saw something today. A couple of people in, I think, Nigeria got arrested for their DDoS activities.
Fantastic.
My favorite thing about Cybersecurity Awareness Month is hearing about the other creative engagements that people do throughout the month at their organizations that you know, we've inspired through what we're putting out there. So NCA, we publish, you know, toolkits and champions pages and webinars like this one and all sorts of resources that we give out for free. And then seeing how people take those and engage with their organizations. And you can really see the impact that that makes. And to my personally, like, you know, I do all these game shows as well, and just seeing the joy and the enjoyment and the smiles on people's faces as we go through the game. And you know, we're having fun and they are too. So it's great to be able to be entertaining and educational at the same time, and hopefully making this all more consumable for everyone. So that's what we got for today's convene chats. Thank you so much, Dr. Bob, for being here. We really appreciate you. And thanks everybody for watching, and have a great rest of your day and great rest of your cybersecurity awareness month this year.
Thanks, Cliff. I appreciate it.
All right. Have a good one. Thank you,
You
everybody.
too. Cheers.